You don't have to be Jewish to learn something profound from the Hanukkah story. In fact, some of the most powerful wisdom from this ancient story has very little to do with religion. It has everything to do with how we navigate our modern life. I'm going to share 5 lessons from the Hanukkah story that apply whether you're religious, spiritual, or completely secular. In fact, the real miracle of Hanukkah wasn't supernatural at all. It was deeply, profoundly human. Stick with me to the end, because I'm going to reveal to you what that miracle was and how it applies to us today. Let me give you the quick version. Around 167 BCE, the Seleucid Empire, think ancient Greeks, controlled the land of Judea, which is the land of Israel today. Their king, Antiochus IV, decided everyone in his empire needed to assimilate into Greek culture. For the Jewish people, this meant abandoning their practices, their traditions, their culture, and their very way of life. It got intense. The sacred temple in Jerusalem was desecrated, traditional practices were outlawed, and people were forced to participate in rituals that violated their core beliefs. But here's a point a lot of people miss. This wasn't just about religion. This was about cultural erasure, forced assimilation, and the loss of self-determination. A small group called the Maccabees decided they had had enough. Led by Judah Maccabee, they launched a guerrilla resistance against one of the most powerful empires of their time. And against all odds, they won. They reclaimed the temple and rededicated it. In fact, that's what Hanukkah means, dedication. The famous story about the oil lasting 8 days instead of 1, that came later in the tradition. We'll get back to why that matters. And this brings us to lesson 1. They had resilience against overwhelming odds. Here's what strikes me about the story. The Maccabees had every rational reason to give up before they ever started. They were outmanned, out-resourced, and facing a professional military force. But they fought anyway. Now maybe you're facing something right now that feels impossible. Maybe it's a career transition, a health challenge, leaving a relationship or a belief system that no longer serves you, or standing up for something you believe in when everyone else says to stay silent. The Maccabees teach us that sometimes you don't need perfect odds. You need strategic action and unwavering commitment to what matters most. They didn't win because they were stronger. They won because they were more committed and more creative in how they fought. This isn't about being reckless or naive. The Maccabees used guerrilla tactics. They were strategic, adaptable, and they played to their strengths. They didn't try to meet the empire in conventional warfare, which they'd lose. They changed the game. When you're facing your own impossible situation, ask yourself, am I trying to fight on terms that favor my opponent? What would it look like to change the rules of engagement entirely? Now, that's about taking action against external obstacles. But what about internal darkness? That moment when you feel like the light inside you is barely flickering. Well, that's where the second lesson comes in. The second lesson deals with the power of small lights. The menorah gets lit over 8 nights, 1 light at a time. It starts with just 2 flames, the shamash, or the servant candle, and the candle of the first night. By the 8th night, all 9 flames are blazing. This gradual illumination is the opposite of our modern all or nothing thinking. We live in a culture that demands instant transformation. New year, new you. 30-day life overhaul. This one hack will change everything. But real change doesn't work that way. Real change is gradual. If you're trying to rebuild your life after a major transition, maybe you've left a religion, ended a career, or you're recovering from loss, you don't need to have all your answers right now. You don't need to solve everything this week. Light one candle. Do one thing that moves you toward the person you want to become. Tomorrow, add one more. The darkness doesn't disappear all at once, and that's okay. Small lights matter more than we think. In pitch darkness, a single match is everything. You might feel like your contribution is insignificant, but to someone else, you might be the only light they see. And that brings us to lesson 3, cultural and spiritual autonomy. The core conflict of Hanukkah wasn't actually about religion in the way we think of today. It was about the right to determine your own identity, your own meaning making, your own spiritual path without external coercion. Many of you watching this have left organized religion. Maybe you grew up in a faith tradition, but it no longer fits. Maybe you were told there's only one right way to believe, but you don't believe that anymore. I've spent over 2 decades in the ministry. I was groomed for it. And when I realized I could no longer affirm the belief system I inherited, I felt like I lost my entire identity. But here's what I've learned. You have the right to seek meaning on your own terms. Leaving one framework doesn't mean abandoning all spiritual exploration. In fact, it's often the beginning of a more authentic journey. The Maccabees weren't fighting for the right to force others into their worldview. They were fighting for the freedom to maintain their own practices without interference. That's the difference between autonomy and authoritarianism. You get to decide what spiritual practices resonate with you. You can borrow from multiple traditions. You can create new rituals. You can find meaning in nature, in philosophy, in service to others, in art. No one gets to gatekeep your spiritual autonomy. But, and this is important, that also means extending that same freedom to others. Your path doesn't have to be their path. Okay, so we've talked about resilience and autonomy. But what do you do when you don't feel like you have enough resources? You don't have enough time or enough energy or enough knowledge to move forward. That's where one of the most misunderstood parts of the Hanukkah story comes in. And it's going to challenge everything you think about miracles. So lesson 4 is about making the most of what you have. All right, let's talk about the oil. According to tradition, when the Maccabees reclaimed the temple, they only found enough consecrated oil for 1 day. But they needed it to burn continuously, and it would take 8 days to make more oil. But miraculously, that single day's oil lasted 8 days. Now, most people stop here. They say, miracle, and move on. But let's take a deeper look. Whether or not you believe in supernatural miracles, there's a profound lesson here about resources. Sometimes you just have to start before you're ready. You don't have 8 days worth of oil. You only have 1 day's worth. But you light it anyway, trusting you'll figure it out as you go. You don't have the full business plan, but you launch the website anyway. You don't have complete clarity on your life purpose, but you start anyway. You don't know how this whole journey is going to end, but you begin. This isn't about being irresponsible. The Maccabees knew more oil was coming. They just needed time. You know that growth takes time. Learning takes time. Transformation takes time. But you can't wait for perfect conditions. You start with insufficient resources and trust the process. You have to shift from, I don't have enough to, well, I have enough to begin. And that brings us to lesson 5, community and traditions as anchors. Hanukkah is celebrated over 8 nights with family, with community. There's food, games, songs, storytelling. And here's what's beautiful about it. These traditions create continuity over generations. Even as beliefs evolve, you can celebrate Hanukkah as a deeply religious practice, or you can celebrate it as a cultural tradition. Or you can appreciate its themes without celebrating it at all. The point is this: shared practices create connection. One of the biggest challenges people face after leaving organized religion is the loss of community and ritual. You don't just leave beliefs, you lose structure, the gathering places, the shared rhythms of life. But the Hanukkah story teaches us you can create new rituals. You can build new communities. You can establish practices that anchor you without requiring beliefs that you no longer hold. Maybe that's a weekly dinner with friends where you share what you're grateful for, or a monthly book club discussing philosophy or science or art. Seasonal celebrations tied to nature's rhythms rather than a religious calendar. Personal mourning rituals that anchor you before the workday. Humans need rhythm, repetition, and shared experiences. These aren't bugs in our programming, they're features. There's no need to abandon ritual just because you've abandoned a religious belief. Create new ones that reflect who you are now. Okay, here's what I promised at the beginning: the real miracle of Hanukkah. The supernatural oil story? That was added centuries later by rabbis trying to emphasize divine intervention. But the original miracle, the one that actually happened, well, that was human. A small group of committed people actually changed history. They preserved their cultural identity for future generations. They proved that determination matters more than having the odds in your favor. And that's actually more inspiring than magic oil. Because magic oil doesn't tell you what to do with your life. But human resilience, human community, human autonomy, those are replicable. Those are lessons you can start applying today. You don't need supernatural intervention to start creating change in your life. You need clarity about what matters, the courage to start with insufficient resources, the strategy to work smart instead of just hard, and the community to sustain you through the long journey. That's the real miracle of Hanukkah, and it's available to you right now. So let's recap the 5 lessons from Hanukkah. Number 1, resilience. Strategic action beats perfect odds. Lesson 2, small lights. Incremental progress compounds over time. Lesson 3, autonomy. You have the right to determine your own spiritual practices. Lesson 4, resourcefulness. Start with what you have and trust the process. Lesson 5, community. Shared rituals create connection. These aren't just religious lessons, these are human lessons. They're drawn from an ancient story that still resonates because it drills deep into something in the human nature. So what are some practices you're going to include in your journey? I'd love to hear about them. Leave them in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this video, want to see others like it, hit that like button and subscribe. My name's John. I'll catch you on the next one.